Hello everyone, this is Dan Miller for Bluegrass Unlimited magazine, and today we're going to do Improvisation Part 3. If you watched the other two, in the first one we worked just with the three notes of the major chords in a 1-4-5 progression. Now that would work no matter what the chord progression was. This idea of playing notes that are in the chord while the chord is being played will work for any chord in any key, okay? And that's your default, okay? That's always going to work. It just might not be the most creative thing you could do, but that's stage one in this, what we're calling fake it till you make it stage. And it's playing a song that you've never heard before, playing a song that you don't know the melody for, playing a song you're sitting in a jam session, they call out a tune, you don't know it. These ideas that we're putting out in this series are based on that approach to improvisation. There are other approaches, and maybe later we'll do different videos on a different approach to improvisation, but here we're saying we're at a jam, they call out a song, we've never heard it before, but we want to take a solo. So the first idea, just play notes out of the chord. The second idea was to play the pentatonic scale. You can play the pentatonic scale of the key, just those 5 notes, but in order to do it a little bit, have a little bit more leeway and flexibility, is, as we went over last time in part 2, play the notes of the pentatonic scale of the chord that you're playing over, okay? And we just work, again, we're still working with a 1-4-5 progression. We'll get into other progressions later, but for now, just the 1-4-5 progression is what we're working with. And I took a solo using the major pentatonic scale related to the key of each chord last time on Lonesome Road Blues. And again, it wasn't the best solo you could do for Lonesome Road Blues, but we're pretending we've never played that song before, we don't know the melody, and we're just trying to fake it till we make it, until we get by. Okay, the next idea would be to add all of the notes of the major scale, okay? So we started out with the 3 notes of the chord, and then we added 2 more notes to make it the major pentatonic. Now we're going to add 2 more notes to make it the whole scale. And I'm not going to go through how to play the major scale on your instrument, because you can find that anywhere on the internet. Just look up the major scale on whatever instrument you're playing. It'll give you the notes of the major scale. It'll show you how it lays out on your instrument. You can do that homework by yourself, okay? Just find the notes of the major scale, and then what you can do is, as the chords are being played, you can just play any note out of the major scale, okay? That will work. But the idea we're going to talk about today, which is chord tone targeting, is going to make it sound a lot more organized, a lot better than just randomly playing scale notes. A lot of times we'll hear players that randomly play scale notes, scale licks over top of chord progression, and it works okay, but it just doesn't sound that great. And what they're not doing is what we're going to call targeting chord tones when the chord changes, number one, but also other times, and we'll talk about all that. So that's going to be the main idea today, is chord tone targeting, okay? So learn the notes of your chord, and that's just laying your fingers down on the chord and you have them. Learn the major pentatonic scale of your 1-4-5 chords, and the next thing is to learn your whole major scale and learn how to play that over the chord progression. Now you can play your major scale over a 1-4-5 chord progression. That'll work just fine. And you can play your major scale over any chord that's diatonic to the key. And what that means is any chord where the notes of the chord are completely made up of notes that are out of the scale of the key. And for any key, the 1 is major, the 2 is minor, the 3 is minor, the 4 is major, the 5 is major, the 6 is minor, and the 7 is diminished. So if you were to take the G scale, for example, the 1, which is G, is a G major chord. The 2, which is an A minor chord. The 3, which is a B minor chord. The 4 is the C chord, C major. The 5 is the D chord, D major. The 6 is an E minor. so minor, and the 7 is F sharp diminished. And those chords are diatonic to the key, meaning all 3 notes of those chords are in the key, out of notes of the scale of the key. And if you have any of those chords in your progression, you can just play the scale of the key and it'll be fine. Okay? And you can practice that, but to get, again, one step further, one step closer to sounding like the song, we're going to use this idea of chord tone targeting. And instead of me going through all of that stuff with you here, I'm going to switch over to a video that Tim May and I shot about 10, 12 years ago that explains this, and Tim will give some examples back and forth. And so we'll move over to that now, which is the next phase of this fake it until you make it stage of improvisation. Again, we're improvising over a chord progression to a song that we've never played before. So here we go. I'll turn it over to the old video that you guys can look at. In the video, we've just talked about the major pentatonic scale that I addressed last time in part 2, and now we're going to go on to the topic of chord tone targeting. So here we go. Now the next skill that we're going to talk about, and it's something that Tim did in that last example, is that he targeted the root note of each chord as the chord changed. So what he played there using the major pentatonic scale wasn't completely random. He was doing a little bit of note targeting. And that's a very good skill to have. And the way you would start to do that, if you don't know how to do it already or are uncomfortable with it, is to simply target the root note as you work with chord progressions. So just do that. Simple
Play the root?
Just play the root.
1, 2, 3, 4. There's G. There's another G. C. There's another C. D. Yeah, so I have 2 Gs. I have an octave. I have a G here and a G here. When it goes to C, I have a C here, a C there. I have a D there and a D there. So I'm just choosing between 2 octaves just to keep it more interesting in that case.
One of the reasons we want to target the root note of the chord when the chord changes, and a little bit later we'll get into targeting other chord tones, but we're going to start with the root. One of the reasons is not only does it help define the chord and seamlessly fit into what you're doing in that regard, but it also, almost all melodies, when the chord changes, it'll hit a chord tone. And you're really safe with the root because it's going to sound like it fits no matter what. So the first thing is you can be totally random with all these notes and it's going to sound like it fits okay, but if you will target a chord tone when the chord changes, it's going to sound like it fits that much more. And that's what Tim did in the example when we're doing the major pentatonic scale, is he hit a chord tone, the root of the chord that I was changing to each time. And if that sounds hard to do while working with the major pentatonic scale, just do that exercise several times that Tim just played, where you just hit the root when the chords change, or you were hitting it at the top of each measure, right? Mm-hmm. Hit a root note for the chord that you're playing over at the top of each measure. That's what Tim just demonstrated. Practice that, get that into your mind, get that into your head, and once you've got that down, then go ahead and add those major pentatonic scale notes behind hitting that root. And that's the next step to trying to move from, next step in the fake it till you make it process. That'll get you that much closer to sounding like you really know what you're playing when you really don't. That's the fake it till you make it part, right?
Right.
So from there, the next thing to do would be to jump up to all the notes of the scale, right? Mm-hmm. Why don't you describe that process?
Yeah, and let's talk about targeting the root. Your ear wants to hear on the top of the measure, the downbeat. Let's just say that the chord is changing there. If I'm in G and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, C, 2, 3, 4, D, 2, 3, 4. On the top of the measure, every time that chord changes, if you'll play a note, let's just say the root, we'll start with the root of that chord every time it changes. I start with G, like I just did, Top of the measure, it goes to a C chord, and I play a C. Here's the good news when you're improvising. As long as you play the notes of the scale, whatever one you're choosing to play, you might play the pentatonic or the full 7 notes. After you target that root note, you can play any of the notes you want to play. Anything. You're free, you get the green light. All you have to remember is target a chord tone, in this case the root. And it's just, why don't we play one time where I play a note that's not in, that does not target the chord tone, just to let them hear how it sounds when it's not right.
So you're going to play scale notes,
right?
But you're not going to play a chord tone,
right?
Right. So
right.
Listen to how this sounds.
Yeah. So what we've been talking about is how, just to get by, you need to start just running notes of the scale or a pentatonic, pentatonic or the full 7 notes of the full scale. Just start playing, because the notes are going to be okay. And what I'm going to do now is to show you that even though it's not completely rotten like that, it's not ideal. And so here's what we mean. I'm going to target notes that are not in the chord tone. 1, 2, 3, 4. The notes that I chose were in the key of G, not completely out of control, being sick notes, but you can hear how it just didn't follow the chords at all.
Didn't fit as well.
Just didn't really work all that.
So now why don't you do what you described just a minute ago, where you're going to hit the root note when I change chords, and then you're going to play scale any scale tones after that.
Okay. So we're hitting the root on the top of each measure when it changes chords. 1, 2, 3, 4. Your ear hears that. You should be able to, as a soloist, outline the chords without, even if he wasn't playing rhythm, I should be able to play and for your ear to hear me changing chords. That's the way you want your playing to develop.
Right. And so because, like we said earlier, melodies are sort of built with chord tones at the chord change, your ear sort of wants to hear that. And so if you just use that simple rule, and if that's all you know about improvisation, you're ready to get started. You're ready to go. And so practice that skill. No matter what song you're playing, get a rhythm track and practice that skill of hitting the root of the chord you change to. No matter how complex the chord progression gets, because the jazz guys practice that too. The jazz guys, where they're playing very complex extended chords and they're playing changing chords every half measure. The guys that teach jazz, this is the exact same thing that they teach, is hit the root when the chord changes. And then they go from there and do what they do. And we're doing the same thing, just our chord progression is a lot simpler. And so if you would learn that skill, that's the first skill that you need to know, and the most important skill. If you would develop that skill, you're ready to improvise. Okay, so that's an idea about chord tone targeting. The next week, in part 4, we'll move on to another topic in our improvisation series for learning how to play a song that you've never heard before at a jam or even on stage or in the studio. Same thing applies. So we'll see you next time. This is Dan Miller for Bluegrass Unlimited magazine.